Part 2. We last left off on the side step. Make sure it's kept oil free to prevent any accidents. Also, your gas tank strap with a rubber seal between it at all times. Also, make sure your gas cap is properly fastened. Also, you're looking for 3 things: a T-bar, a chain, and a rubber seal. Make sure it's there at all times. Make sure your gas tank is properly closed at all times. From there, we're moving on to the primary air tank. Is on this side. The secondary air tank is on the other side. Next, this is your catwalk. Catwalk should be kept oil free. Make sure it's kept to prevent any accidents. Then you got your diesel lines. Make sure you're not ripped or torn or leaking any diesel. Then you got your air lines. Make sure you're not leaking any air. Then you got your trailer electrical. Make sure it's working properly. Then you got your air lines. Blue is service, red is emergency. Make sure they have a pigtail at all times. Make sure your glad hands have a rubber seal between it at all times. This is your header board. Make sure it's not ripped to prevent any cargo loss. Then you have your drive shaft. Make sure it's not cracked, not broken, no legal welds. Here we have a 5th wheel air tank. Then you got 5th wheel airline. Here is the battery box. Battery box should have the cover on at all times. Make sure your 5th wheel slide is held in place. 5th wheel sliding rail held in place, all bolts and nuts. 5th wheel sliding seat. Make sure not cracked, not broken or missing, no legal welds. Then you got your locking jaw adjustment ball, which is on the front of the 5th wheel. Then you got your release lever for your 5th wheel. Then you got your pivot pin and your sliding teeth locking adjustment. From there, you make sure your 5th wheel platform has no gap between it and the apron of the trailer. Make sure it's properly greased to prevent any steering problems. From there, you're moving on to the leaf springs. Make sure not cracked, not broken or missing, no legal welds. Leaf spring mount, not cracked, not broken, no legal welds, properly bolted to the frame. Then you got single or dual brake chambers on the back. Make sure your tires, the back tires can have recap no less than 2/32 of life left. Make sure they're properly abutted to each other. Make sure they have at least 4 inches of space in between. And no trash and debris. Also, inflation, condition, and depth. Inflation, 90 to 100 psi unless tire specifications say otherwise. Condition, make sure it's not ripped or torn. No lumps, no bumps. Make sure the depth is no less than 2/32. Next, you're moving on to the rim. The rim, not cracked, not broken, no legal welds. Make sure it's not bended to prevent any air loss. Then your valve stem should never be touching the rim at all. This is a grease hub. The difference between this is it has grease in it. The front is oil, and the rear of the trailer is oil as well. This is grease. Make sure it's properly greased. Make sure the lug nuts are properly tightened with the spacer between it at all times. Make sure you don't see any rust. If you see rust, it's an indication of looseness. From the side, next, make sure the side of your trailer is not ripped or torn. Any cargo loss. Make sure your mud flaps are at least 4 to 6 inches from the ground, but not ripped or torn or missing. Then you're moving on to your airbags. Make sure it's not ripped or torn. They're working properly. Make sure your shock absorbers are working properly. Then if you look under, you can see your locking jaw around the kingpin of the trailer. Then while you're here, you have 3 lights here on the back. You have 2 red and 1 white. They are running lights, turning signals, 4-way flashers, and brake lights. The middle is a clear white light, which is your reverse light. Here at the bottom, you have a DOT reflector. Make sure it's visible and kept clean at all times. Next, you move it on to your landing gear. This is the landing gear gearbox. It has 2 gears. It has a low and a high. This is your crank, your landing gear crank. This is a J-hook that you could put your crank on. Landing gear leg, landing gear bolt. Make sure it's kept trash and debris free. Make sure it's never missing. Landing gear support is going here, going across that way. Make sure it's not cracked, not broken, no legal weld. Also, these are your cross members of the trailer. Make sure it's not cracked, not broken, no legal welds. Make sure the floor of your trailer is not ripped or torn. Prevent any cargo loss. Also, down the middle of the trailer, you have air lines and electrical lines. Make sure it's not hanging too low. Make sure they're in good working condition. Next you have a side amber reflector and the side marker light. Make sure they're properly displayed, as well as DOT reflectors. From there, we're moved on to the ATC, the adjustment bar, the torsion bar, and the torque bar, which is on the other side. This is the adjustment here, the torsion, and the torque on that side. Make sure it's not cracked, not broken, no legal welds. The difference between these leaf springs and the front ones is that these are welded to the trailer. Make sure the leaf springs are not cracked, not broken, no legal welds. Also, you have dual brake chambers here as well. The reason why they are dual is because one is spring activated, the other is for your service brake. Also, your tires, make sure they're at least 4 inches from each other. Make sure there's no trash or debris in between it. Your ICD, inflation, condition, and depth. Make sure inflation is 90 to 100 psi unless tire specifications say otherwise. The condition, make sure it's not ripped or torn, no lumps, no bumps. The depth, make sure you have no less than 230 seconds, and you can have recap on the trailer. You cannot have recap on the front steer tires. You can have recap on the drive tires and the trailer tires. Make sure your rim is not cracked, not broken, not leaking any air, or bended to prevent any air loss. Your valve stem never touching the rim, and then your lug nuts with the spacer between it at all times. Make sure you do not see any rust. If you see rust, it's an indication of looseness. Also, here you have an oil hub properly filled with the oil hub seal at all times. You could check to see if you have oil by taking that off. Next, you have a side marker light here. From there, you're moving on to the back. The doors, easy up, easy down. Make sure your lights are working properly. These are your brake lights, your turning signals, 4A flashers and running lights. Also, your license plate kept visible, kept up to date with the license plate light working at all times. Here is your DOT bar. Your DOT bar has to be 22 inches from the ground at all times. Make sure you have DOT reflector kept visible and seen at all times. This is your door latch. Make sure it's working properly. This is your door strap. Pull it down. Make sure it's working properly. At the top of the trailer, we have three lights. They are 3 red indicator lights. Make sure they're working properly. We move on to the side. Here we have these mud flaps. Mud flaps have to be 4 to 6 inches from the ground, not ripped or torn or missing. Here you have another red side indicator light. Another red indicator reflector. DOT reflector as well. These tires, this side is the same as the other side. Just make sure you let them know that there's nothing different between this side and the other side. So you can move on to the front. Make sure your side of the trailer is not ripped or torn to prevent any cargo loss. Make sure the landing gear is working properly, not cracked, not broken, no legal welds. And then same as this, the same as the other side, mud flaps, not ripped or torn, 4 to 6 inches from the ground. These tires are the same as the other side. Just make sure you let the examiner know that they're the same. And that should be about it.
Caddy, you didn't talk about the caddy.
Okay. One thing I forgot to mention, the caddy is so you can hang your glad hands on when you don't have a trailer in use. And then for your electrical line is on top of the caddy. And that should be it. On the side you have a light. It's a trailer hookup light. Make sure your frame is not cracked, not broken, no legal welds.
Oops.